As you know, this show is dedicated to the ladies. And it is for every lady that Timex has created this beautiful Timex Ladies Waterproof. Because for all its lovely feminine lines, this Timex watch is made to withstand the toughest kind of treatment you may give it in everyday wear. We have a live demonstration to prove it to you. Now, I'm going to attach this Timex Ladies Waterproof inside this KitchenAid automatic dishwasher. Then I'll put up the door so water won't go in your living room. Put in this gimmick so it'll run. Here we go. Look at those powerful jets of water hit that watch. You can see it swinging in there. Actually, there are 45 gallons of water churning around in that machine every minute, so you can imagine the beating that it's getting. Well, let's see how our Ladies Waterproof took that beating. Now, I have here a super sensitive microphone that will amplify the normally light ticking of this watch so you can hear it running. Is it coming through? Yes, I'm told you can hear it, so you know it's still ticking. The lovely Timex Ladies Waterproof watches can certainly take a licking and keep on ticking. And I want to repeat, this is a live demonstration.
No money, baby. I just got an old wristwatch on my own. No money, baby.
The voice that you heard on that commercial was that of John Cameron Swayze, a big fixture on television. He's sort of theoretically a journalist, kind of, in the early days of television. It's also the blues album that he put out a little bit later, also for the music. No, that's not. It's Leighton and Hopkins. But that commercial kind of ties into some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today, because, in fact, you could look at the last, let's say 100, 125 years of human history as a series of questions about the things in our lives that are electrically powered, digitally powered, that require a certain amount of mechanisms to work. And then the fact that, we're made of water, and then we hang around with water, and we're also pouring water on stuff and drinking liquid things and spilling beers. And how do you incorporate it? How do you make it all go together? And the person who's been thinking about this in a very systematic way and has produced a very interesting book about it all is our first guest today, Rachel Plotnick, Associate Professor of Cinema and Media Studies in the Media School at Indiana University, Bloomington. Her new book is License to Spill: Where Dry Devices Meet Liquid Lives. So, Rachel, first of all, welcome back to the show. We had you on about push buttons, I think, a number of years ago.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
So maybe just unpack that commercial a little bit. There's a lot going on there, right? So, some of it is kind of, all about women and what they should be doing and shouldn't be doing, but also about a certain amount of aspiration, maybe on behalf of a watch. This is kind of what the meat of your book is about. It's about sort of how we live and then how we live alongside these devices.
Yeah, I think that commercial is a really great example of some of the things that I've been thinking about. And I was really interested in the idea of Timex and how they were trying to test those watches. You heard at the end their kind of slogan, it takes a licking and keeps on ticking. So there's this idea of punishment implied there, that you've got to kind of put through the device through its paces and see whether it can survive. And I thought that idea of punishment was really interesting. And as you alluded to, there's also this element of gender involved. So initially, most water-resistant or waterproof watches were aimed at men, and a lot of that came from thinking about World War I and World War II and what soldiers could endure with their devices as they began wearing watches. And initially, strap watches were really designed for women. They were considered jewelry or bracelets. So for a long time, it was about how do we make this watch appear masculine, hardy, tough. And then, as you heard from John Cameron Swayze, there was this pendulum swing. Okay, now how can we sell these rugged devices to women? Well, we want to make them seem as though they're still tough and hardy, but also that they're feminine. They can go through the dishwasher and they'll be fine.
So, yes, I mean, I think, the first half of the 20th century, we're kind of going through this transformation of this species, and we're sort of becoming Homo electronicus or something. We're living alongside electric devices and related things that in a way that we haven't before, and yet we're trying to figure out which things we can continue doing and which ones things we can't. And how about this radio? Can I take it in the bathtub with me? But maybe say a little bit about this. It feels like there is for, a few decades in the early 1900s, this kind of figuring stuff out process and maybe trying not to die in the process.
Exactly. I think that, as you said, water and life has always been a messy process. I mean, anyone who's had a leak in their roof or, got rain in their boots knows that liquids can be a problem just for going about our day and doing everyday life. But as you suggest, I think when we introduce electricity into the picture, that certainly complicates things because electricity and liquids don't mix. So as we're looking at the early decades of the 20th century, it becomes very apparent that not only are they not going to mix in a way that might short out your device, but hey, if you drop that radio in the bathtub, you might actually die. So there were some pretty dire consequences in the beginning, particularly before the regular use of consumer batteries, because you had cords attached to devices and you had a high risk of things not being grounded. And so when people were thinking about, can I mix this device with liquids? It was more than just, I really might run the risk of having to go buy a new one of these things versus I could actually really hurt myself.
Yeah, and I think, stuff that we don't even really think about today had to be thought about for a while. You were talking about grounding and stuff like that. So Mrs. Mapplethorpe comes in from the rain and she's got her umbrella with her and she closes it up and leans it up against the wall right next to a lamp or something that's plugged in, which I don't think we would really think too much about doing that today. I mean, I think we'd figure out, I don't look around when I put an umbrella down to make sure there's nothing plugged in near it. But that was a real problem in the early days.
It was very fascinating to me to see that, especially when it came to telephone cords, that there was all of this advice that telephone companies put out about what you could and couldn't do near your telephone cord. And as you said, umbrellas was a big one. They were constantly chastising people for propping up their umbrellas next to their cords. But other things too, like babies teething and slobbering on the cord, people, bringing drinks into the workplace and spilling at their desk. And I was kind of struck by the fact that on the one hand, yes, these are not problems we have to worry about today. But on the other hand, when we think of many of our contemporary devices, we are still struggling with these same kind of questions about our habits, about where to mix liquids and devices or not. And we make choices all the time, about should I bring this thing to the beach? Is it okay to have it in the bathroom with me? Can I eat my lunch while I'm at my keyboard? These are contemporary questions that have kind of this long historical root.
Right. So, and I think also to this day, we sometimes don't know, unless we really read carefully what's accompanied a new product, what it can do and what it can't do. And I will give you an example from my own life. So I think about 2 summers ago, I decided I wanted to spend more time out on our deck. And I thought, what I need is a fan out there because you got a lot of mosquitoes and bugs and stuff like that. And they don't like blowing air. And so I thought, I'm going to get a fan that oscillates. And so I was saying this to my significant other. I said, I need to get a waterproof fan, have it just be out there. And so the next thing I know, this fan shows up. I haven't even asked for it, but she gets it. And so it's out there, and we use it a few times, and then one day it rains, and it doesn't work anymore. It doesn't turn on at all. And I said, I thought this was waterproof. And she said, I don't think they meant waterproof in the sense that you could leave it out in the rain. I thought, well, what exactly does waterproof mean then? But there are a lot of terms like waterproof, water repellent, water resistant. They have a certain amount of federal regulation that goes along with it. But just because something has the word water in its name doesn't mean that you can leave it out in the rain. How do we decode all of that?
There's really a lot to it. I think your story is probably one that a lot of people have encountered, that the language is very confusing. A lot of these terms seem to overlap. They're also often used in a kind of hype way in marketing and advertising. So it seems like everything can go to the bottom of the ocean and it's going to be just fine. There are different ways to kind of codify when we think about water resistance. So people may have encountered things like IP ratings. There are ISO standards for watches. Mil spec is another one that's kind of military standards. So there are lots of kind of different standards that exist across industries. And people have been figuring out for a long time kind of how do we test devices and then how do we explain to consumers what those devices can do and what they can't do. But I think even when we pick up a device and it seems like it's very straightforward what it can withstand, it isn't always that clear in practice. And that's for a number of reasons. One, it can have to do with what can it withstand over time. So something out of the box may work really well, but the more you use it, the more that resistance will wear down. It could have to do with the type of liquid that you're talking about. So a lot of devices are tested under fresh water, but then, you spill beer or soda, you go in a jacuzzi, it's not going to work under those conditions. Or it could just be that the volume of water is an issue. So, all right, you take that fan out onto your deck and it gets a sprinkle, it'll be fine. But if you're having a torrential downpour, it's not going to work.
By the way, I put the fan in a side shed for 2 years, and I prayed for it. And actually, today it was very confused. It's electronic. It just would speed up and slow down for no reason and oscillate. But it actually, I could turn it on. Something happened. Something happened.
That's something.
Yeah, I planted rice all around it. Well, we'll talk about how the rice does. It's not really a great idea, but we should say, yeah. I mean, the point you make is a really important one, because when we talk about, for example, there are waterproof Bluetooth speakers, and Consumer Reports tests them. First of all, they're rated something IPX7, which you can explain to us. But the Consumer Reports test them by putting them in pressurized water tanks and stuff. And I mean, it's kind of an amazing idea that there would be a speaker that you could bring out on your deck. You just leave out there and it could get rained on. But maybe that's a little misleading too, that IPX7 rating. Tell us, first of all, what that all means.
Yeah, so when you look at IP ratings, they stand for ingress protection ratings. That's the IP part. And the idea of ingress is basically just liquid entering the device. And so there are different numbers associated with that IP rating, ranging from a tiny little sprinkle all the way up to submersion. I think the thing that's difficult about those ratings is that they're super, super specific. So it might be, okay, if water hits your device at this angle for this amount of seconds under this much pressure, then it'll meet that standard. But of course, everyday life is very, very different than how we think about testing. And I think that gets very challenging when we try to figure out laboratory conditions versus everyday life conditions. And so even though we can see a rating on a device that we pick, and that's very seductive, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work in the same way in practice that you see it on that particular test that was done under these, very controlled situations or circumstances.
I think the other part, one of the really interesting sort of human questions that I think runs through your book is, how much should we expect? How much should we want to be able to have? And there's this great term that you use at the beginning, and then it comes up throughout the book, this idea of thrown togetherness, this idea that we have that, there's not exactly a primary activity in the bathroom. Yes, you can poop and you can pee and you can take a shower and you can wash your hands, but you can also use a whole bunch of different devices in there, bring your phone in there, or people think that anyway, that they can just bring a whole bunch of other stuff in there and do all of those things. And I think there's a big human question, which is, should you want to be able to use an expensive laptop and have your cat walking around on the same table that it's on and drink a Slurpee and, I don't know, and change a diaper? Is that even a good idea, setting aside whether or not the device will survive it?
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that. I think that that's one of the themes that stuck out to me as I was doing this research, is this kind of persistent ambivalence about liquids in our devices. And on the one hand, I think people feel a lot of frustration about the fact that they're just trying to go about their day and things break or don't work as they're supposed to, that there's kind of this perpetual fragility. Okay, I use my phone all day. Why can't I take it with me to the kitchen while I'm cooking dinner or washing my hands? And people want kind of more of that seamless interaction. But on the other hand, I think that social ambivalence is a feeling about, maybe my life is already too saturated with devices, and maybe it's good to have some places where that device can't go, and that's somewhat freeing. And so I began to notice these themes, especially in television and movies, where people were kind of breaking their devices on purpose by throwing it in a pond or dunking in a cup of water because they just wanted a break from their phone. And that was pretty fascinating to me. It was kind of like, okay, maybe sometimes fragility is a way of saving us from ourselves and our constant addiction to our devices. People say the shower is the one place where you can be free with your thoughts and you don't have to bring your phone. So I think there are some real questions to think about there in terms of, can it get wet, but also should it get wet?
Yeah, actually there were, and I think this is in the book too, but I remember a time, I think before there were smartphones, maybe before everybody even had a cell phone, where there was like this there was this radio thing that you could put in the shower. I think it had suction cups that stuck it to the wall. Mm-hmm. So if you just couldn't stand to be alone with your thoughts in the shower, for that brief amount of time, you could be informing yourself or whatever. And my sense is it turned out there wasn't a huge demand for that.
Yeah, that was kind of a funny gimmicky device, particularly in the 80s, where they were really trying to sell these as, stocking stuffers and great for youth and everyone should have one. And that didn't really take off, I think, to a large extent. But then you begin to see things like Sony Walkman and the sports Walkman that could get wet. Today, obviously, you mentioned Bluetooth speakers, and now we have all kinds of devices that can stick to showers. I think there's even a shower head that is also a speaker. You can replace your regular one with a speaker head so that it's playing music actually out of your shower. And probably a lot of people just prop up their phone somewhere and turn on Bluetooth to a speaker. They're just, playing wherever they are. So I do think we've become used to that, but it's kind of funny to see these moments when there's kind of this societal rejection of a technology like, oh, that's excessive, or I don't really see the point of that, or why would I need that? Versus it does become this kind of mainstream thing, like everybody wants it.
By the way, we're talking to Rachel Plotnick right now. Her book is Licensed to Spill, Where Dry Devices Meet Liquid Lives. So I'll tell you another parable from my own idiotic life. So this is about 6 or 7 years ago. I was doing a lot of lap swimming at the Jewish Community Center. And swimming laps is really, really boring. It's really so boring. And so I thought, why can't I listen? Why can't I listen to something while I'm doing this? Well, it turns out you can. And I think the products are even better now. This is 6 or 7 years ago. But you could have these MP3 players and something to go inside your ears, and you can listen to stuff while you're swimming back and forth. Except that I found that I was just pausing every 2 or 3 lengths, because there's something be a little bit wrong. I had to fiddle with one of the earbuds or something. And once again, this gets back, I think, to that existential question. Is it really necessary to do that? Or would it make sense for you to just think about something else or go into kind of a dream state or whatever Mark Spitz did for his entire life while he was swimming laps?
Yeah, I love that story. I think it is a complicated question. And I've noticed that especially like when I take my kids to the beach or the pool, and my first instinct is, oh, let's take a picture of them. And part of me will say, okay, well, what's going to happen to my phone if I get my wet, sandy fingers all over this? And is this really a good idea? But the second question is, do I really need the device in that moment? And I think it's something that we should all pause and think about and consider once in a while, rather than just sort of taking for granted that it is always a good idea. Increasingly, I think we live in a society where the goal is to eliminate boredom at all costs, right? And to fill every single moment of time with some kind of technology. And so people have started to feel uncomfortable at this idea of being unplugged even for a little bit of time. And in some ways, I think waterproofing helps to, eliminate that feeling of ever having to be bored, because any situation, any environment can also be mediatized now.
Yeah, I think it wants to eliminate that. And it probably also kind of wants to eliminate any consideration of whether one is being careless or reckless. So we do have these phones, and in a very McLuhan-esque sense, they are extensions of our central nervous system. They are a device that we carry with us that have a lot of things that seem like extensions of our brains and our feelings. Maybe it would make sense to think of that as a damageable thing. But it's also, if you don't put some kind of case on it, it's kind of this slippery thing that is constantly wanting to fall out of our hands and possibly into water. I don't exactly know what question I'm asking you right now, but I know you have an answer anyway.
I can say something now. I do think that, that's the flip side of it. We can make the argument and say, okay, let's make everything indestructible. Let's make our devices so perfect that we can take them anywhere we want all the time, and they're totally, uncombustible, unbreakable. Now, there are some problems with that in terms of repair, because a lot of times these things get built so well, they become so bulletproof that you can't take them apart. You have to just throw them away because there's no way to open them up or fix them if they break. So that's an issue. There can be environmental issues with that too, in terms of some kinds of coatings that get put on things, glues, various things that really aren't very environmentally friendly when you're waterproofing something. But then there also is kind of, I think what bothered me is thinking about these devices are made, as you said, so slippery, so fragile, so prone to breaking. And then we're encouraged to use them for everything that we do, from social support to health services to our jobs. And how crazy is it that we'll spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on this device, and then as soon as you spill something on it, it breaks? That seems pretty crazy to me and pretty unfair to the consumer.
And one of the places we bring them is into the bathroom, where there's at least one fairly permanent pool of water sitting there. And this is such a big problem that it's sort of memeified. There's a hashtag iTurd. I think you have a report that more than 850,000 cell phones ended up in a in the toilet in the United Kingdom in 1 year. That was 2008. In some ways, it's not a really good report card on our species that we're doing this. That it's not this incredibly rare thing.
I don't really know what to make of it. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about toilets and smartphones, probably more than I should. And it is, kind of a questionable thing. I mean, obviously we can think about that people have been reading on the toilet for a very long time. That's not a new phenomenon, right? Think about newspapers and magazines. And there's a long history of reading in the bathroom, which people tend not to talk about. It's considered to be very kind of taboo or private behind closed doors, but people have always done it. And so in some ways, I think the smartphone is just the newest or latest iteration of that phenomenon. And it's not any different than how we might think of taking a book into the bathroom. But it's treated as this kind of public health problem, like avoid sitting for too long and don't rot your brain scrolling on social media while you're on the toilet and these kinds of things. So I think it has a very negative connotation. But if you look at kind of surveys in recent years, especially around young people, people 15 to 25, the statistics really show that the majority of people are bringing their phone into the bathroom. So that's another thing that's kind of just really been normalized over time.
Actually, I can say that as somebody who's started his career in print journalism in 1976, we used to just talk about that. I mean, there used to be kind of a rule of thumb about a magazine article or something. You'd say, would you continue, if you were started this magazine article while you were on the toilet, would you continue to read it all the way to the end while your legs fell asleep? Because that's the ultimate tribute maybe to prose. And it just seems like if we're going to do this with cell phones, then we ought to adapt because nobody's ever dropped a book into the toilet. So maybe there should be just a book in your bathroom and you put the smartphone inside the book in this smartphone-sized hole. And so now it's in something that can't be dropped into the toilet. But there also are, and I checked Consumer Reports this morning, there are waterproof, truly, according to Consumer Reports, waterproof cases for phones. There's something called the OtterBox Free Case. They kept a phone completely dry during a 5-minute dunk into 6.5 feet of water. I don't know. I mean, what do we make of all that? Do we just want to keep waterproofing more and more? Is that the solution, or is the solution some kind of moderation that Aristotle might have approved of?
I think it's probably somewhere in the middle, right? I think one of the issues that I take is that there's this huge flourishing accessories market and extended warranty market, and the burden is really on the consumer to have to buy all of these things to try to manage this problem. And it feels like not having more protection built into the device is pretty unfair, and that we get blamed when these incidents happen. And I don't even like thinking of them necessarily as incidents or events, because it's just life. I think that we treat it as though it's kind of this taboo thing when life is wet and it's just part of our existence. But on the other hand, in the name of moderation, we might say that the solution is probably not to bubble wrap everything and seal up every gasket and make it so that every single thing can go in water. I think we kind of need to pick and choose about, what things need to be protected and what don't. But probably what matters the most is really thinking about our lifestyles and kind of what's healthy and good for us, right? And I think the pandemic kind of brought up this issue of, hey, maybe it isn't great to have to care for your children and work a 12-hour shift and try to eat lunch at your desk. And you do need a healthy separation between some of these things. So probably the issues are more with how we carry out our lives than it is about whether we protect the device or not.
Yeah, you have a nice citation of one of our friends, Amanda Mull, at the end of this book, writing about that exact question during the pandemic. Okay, so we're almost out of time, but I kind of glossed over something that you were mentioning, and I think it ties into a conversation that I had yesterday. There's the whole idea that if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you're a spear, everything looks like a war. But if you're a bag, everything looks like a domestic situation. And there's a way that we see in the book that the language of waterproofing suggests a war against water, a war against liquid that we are fighting, which is kind of weird considering that we're mostly water.
Yeah, I was so fascinated by this. Just if you pay attention to language, if any of you are familiar with the idea of torture testing, the very fact that it's called torture is so bizarre to me. And often when you're looking at, those Consumer Reports things or things with journalists or even just people on YouTube and TikTok who are testing devices in various liquids, it's always around the idea of punishment and abuse and torture and putting the device through its paces. And that takes us full circle back to that Timex clip that you played at the very beginning of this segment. And I think that speaks to how taboo liquids have been in our society, as well as kind of this longstanding association with militarization and war in our devices. And that's kind of lingered for, more than 50, 60 years. And so one of the things I advocate for is trying to do away with this kind of stigma and shame and this, violent language around liquids, that we're in a new moment. I think it's time to kind of reimagine how we mix our devices with these liquids of everyday life.
All right, that's a beautiful place to end. What a great book and what a great guest you are. Rachel Plotnick, thanks so much for joining us again. Associate Professor of Cinema and Media Studies at the Media School at Indiana University, Bloomington. Her new book is License to Spill, Where Dry Devices Meet Liquid Lives. We'll take a break. We'll be back.
They might as well be dead if the rain comes. If the rain comes, when the sun shines, they slip into the shade. When the sun shines, wearing a raincoat is flying around in a plane made of a raincoat. But when you think of that, you hurt your mind, and you'll need a friend to talk you down.
Well, I'm not wearing a raincoat today. I do own 3 pieces of sort of rain gear, not counting my rain pants, which I may bring up. I may bring up later. But I own a little, in a stuff bag, I think it's from the now defunct Eastern Mountain Sports. Then I own a rain jacket from REI. But my best rain jacket by far, the most effective rain jacket I have right now, is I think the product of my online interaction with the following guest. Zoe Vanderweed, senior staff writer covering style, apparel, and accessories at Wirecutter, the co-author of the piece, The Best Men's and Women's Rain Jackets and Raincoats. Zoe, I believe you are the reason I own a Columbia rain jacket. Maybe just say a little bit about, obviously the main thing you want from rain gear is to keep the water off you, but that sort of oversimplifies all of the variables that you have to look at. So tell us about those variables.
Well, hi, I'm honored to have influenced your choice of rain jacket. When we're looking at rain jackets, we're looking obviously at, the ability of the fabric to keep you dry. We're also looking at the design, the overall design of the garment and how well it seals water out. So you're looking at things like the zipper, the pockets, the seams, the cuffs, the hood. I think the hood's a really important one. And then you're also just looking at sort of the overall functionality of the jacket, how you're going to use it. If it's important for you that it's lightweight, that it's packable, if it's important to you, the aesthetics of the jacket, how it looks, how it fits, how it feels to wear. Like a pet peeve of mine is rain jackets where the inner membrane doesn't have, or there's no soft lining on the inside. And so they have that plasticky feeling against your skin. Oh, yeah. So there's just a lot of things to think about.
Yeah, the Columbia that I have has sort of mesh inside, which is kind of nice. It kind of creates some air and stuff like that. But, a chain is only as good as its weakest link. And I suppose a rain jacket is only as good as its seams and zippers, right? If there's any part of this that doesn't work right or begins to leak or be defective, the whole thing just falls apart. Not literally.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why, when you're shopping for a rain jacket, you're looking for things that have sealed seams, which means that the seams are bonded so that water can't get in through the tiny little holes, those tiny little stitch holes. You're looking obviously for either a waterproof zipper or a covered zipper, covered with like a storm flap. And you're looking for secure pockets. Like I tested for this guide, I tested these really beautiful, expensive raincoats that were perfectly waterproof, but they had completely open pockets, and the pockets just filled up with water like little buckets in the rain. And so, like you said, it's only as effective as its weakest point.
Yeah, I put my rain jacket on most frequently early in the morning when I'm about to take the dog. I go on a fairly long dog walk every morning. And certainly one of the key aspects is the dog cookies that have to be in the left pocket of the jacket. And if the pocket's going to fill up with water, I'm going to have dog cookie soup, and that's not going to be great. When you say you test these things, I assume you don't sit around waiting for it to rain so you can all run out and test your rain jacket. So how do you test a rain jacket? Under what circumstances?
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't control the weather. So we do it in a number of ways, but in order to kind of really standardize our testing, what I did in the latest, round of testing for this guide was I took every rain jacket that I had and I put it on, closed up all the zippers, closed up all the, fastenings as tight as I could, cinched the hood around my face. And then I got into the shower and turned on the water for 3 full minutes and just stood there and kind of, danced around, got myself fully immersed. Fun fact, that is the equivalent of being doused with about 7.5 gallons of water. So, we're really, really testing these things. And what I'm doing, in the meantime, is paying attention to obviously how waterproof the fabric is, but also are there little gaps where water is seeping in? Where are the weak spots in the jacket? How good a job is the hood doing of directing water off of my face? How good can I access a pocket without it filling up with water? And so then after I step out of the shower, I would examine each jacket and kind of take a look at it and examine myself also, see how wet I was. And that kind of, helps us do a standardized test. And then, obviously we also want to test in real world conditions. So after we're done, doing sort of our formal testing for the guide, we keep our picks for long-term testing. And we use them in our daily lives. We wear them to work. We wear them on hikes. We wear them, just on bike rides. We wear them doing what we would normally do. And I can collect feedback from our long-term testers about how they're performing in, real world situations under different weather conditions in different use cases.
Yeah, but just make the company send you to Belfast for a week or something. I mean, you'll find out whether the raincoat works or not. Now, we do have, and this is something that when I realized this, getting ready to talk to you, I realized that I may have made an error, one of the many errors of my life. So I do carry in my car a little bag of anything I might need. And one thing that's in there is a pretty old rain garment, I think maybe from Eastern Mountain Sports, a company that does not even exist anymore. And it's one of those that's in a stuff bag. And I've actually used it in the past. I used it on a very rainy bicycle trip through the Netherlands at one point, and it was great. But that doesn't mean it's great now, right? Rain jackets are not necessarily forever.
Yeah, so most rain jackets you are going to need to do a little bit of maintenance and upkeep on. So usually a rain jacket has a waterproof membrane, and then it also usually is treated with a DWR surface treatment, and that stands for durable water repellent. And what happens is over time that DWR can wear off. And so what you'll find is that your jacket will start to kind of it's called wetting out. It's kind of a gross sounding word, but it's basically the the outside of the fabric will start to look wet. And it won't necessarily penetrate through the membrane, but it kind of reduces the breathability of the jacket, so it makes you feel sort of clammy and humid on the inside. And then also the membrane, the lining itself can sort of peel and, chip away. But with regard to the DWR, you actually can refresh that at home. So if you have an old jacket that feels less waterproof than it was when you first bought it, check the care instructions on it. But oftentimes, just throwing it in the dryer or a pass with an iron can kind of revive the DWR. And then there are other products that you can reapply surface treatment. Like there's a product called Nick Wax, which, you can use to re-waterproof your jacket.
Well, that's pretty cool. Yes, I should say I'm 70 years old. So if you asked me if I was sweating out, I would say you're going to have to be more specific because that has multiple meanings here. But we should also just quickly mention, since we're talking about chemicals and stuff like that, there is some reason to at least wonder about PFAS, polyfluoroalkyls, I can't say it, substances, which is a forever chemical. Say a little bit about that in rain jackets and whether that's anything worth worrying about.
Yeah. So obviously, PFAS have been linked to a lot of health risks. And we're exposed to them in the environment through many sources, and we kind of, our exposure is cumulative. So for that reason, it's a good idea to limit your exposure where you can. So, all of our current rain jacket picks in the guide are made without the addition of intentionally added PFAS. And this is the way that the rainwear industry is trending more broadly, especially after bans on PFAS in clothing in states like New York and California. But, if you already own a rain jacket that you bought, 5 years ago that you think may contain PFAS and it still works just fine, you don't necessarily need to throw it away. The experts that we've talked to say that wearing your rain jacket occasionally isn't going to expose you to significant amounts of harmful chemicals or the associated risk. And then of course there's the thinking that, throwing away a functional item is rarely the most sustainable thing to do. But if you're shopping for a new raincoat, I would look for the words PFAS free or PFC free. If you're looking for Gore-Tex specifically, you should look for EPE, which stands for expanded polyethylene, which is a newer version of Gore-Tex that doesn't include PFAS. Or you can look for materials like polyurethane that don't rely on surface treatments for water repellency.
I will give people one more thing to worry about, or just maybe a suggestion, which is if you're listening to this conversation and you're thinking maybe you need a new piece of rain equipment, I would tell you that, first of all, both of the raincoats that are in my closet, or rain jackets, the one from the REI and then the one that Zoe persuaded me to get from Colombia, are made in Vietnam. And it turns out a lot of rainwear is made in Vietnam. So you might want to get your rain jacket before the tariffs go back up to 46%, because your rain gear will cost a lot more if that's the case. Zoe, this isn't really anywhere on your mission statement, but I would just like to say something to you, which is that I would like to put in a word for rain pants. I mean, rain pants are really good. I mean, sometimes you feel a little stupid if you put them on in the rain jacket and then it's not really raining that hard and you sort of over prepared for the rain. But once you've had them, like kind of cold, rainy days and stuff like that, I'm just saying, I'm not telling Wirecutter what to do, but you might want to try them out.
My dad is a rain pants evangelist. He's a bicycle commuter, so you got to keep the legs dry. And you know what? I think we have some rain pants enthusiasts at Wirecutter too. I think our outdoor team might have something to say about rain pants.
Yeah. But it's like the kind of thing you don't want to put it in your Tinder profile. Rain pants enthusiast. No, it just sounds really dorky and over self-protective. It's so great to talk to you, and it's certainly a lot of fun to see what Wirecutter recommends about anything. Zoe Vanderweed, senior staff writer covering style, apparel, and accessories at Wirecutter, not a rain pants enthusiast, but co-author of the piece, The Best Men's and Women's Rain Jackets and Raincoats.
Better when something is wrong. You get excitement in your bones and every When night comes and you're on your own, you can say I chose to be alone. Who wants to be right as the rain? It's harder when you're on top. 'Cause when hard work don't pay off and I'm tired, there ain't no room in my bed as far as I'm concerned. So wipe that dirty smile off.
All right, time to say a few thank yous here, starting with the maestro, Dylan Ray's our technical producer. This is an LTQEP production. That's Lily Tyson, Quality Entertainment Productions. She is the producer of this particular episode. We also want to thank Robin Doyen Aiken, one of our bosses, who helped book Zoe, our previous guest. While I think LTQEP, I think they're in court a lot these days. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. But so I think when Lily was being deposed or something, Robin helped book that guest. All right, we're really excited about this. Our next guest, because something I hadn't really thought about that much, partly because I don't live in the Pacific Northwest. I'm not in the lumber industry in any way, so I had never given too much thought to the idea of what do you do if you're doing a lot of work outdoors, but you have to write things down. How do you write in the rain? We're going to talk right now to the network and system administrator for a company called Rite in the Rain. But before we do this, I wanted to mention the plot for my upcoming book. Can I have some romance novel music, please? Frank Palmer is a heartbroken surgeon who comes to Rodanthe, an unincorporated community and census-designated place located in Dare County, North Carolina. He meets a beautiful innkeeper named Adrienne Goss and struggles with the problem of confessing his feelings for her. If only, he thinks, he could pour out his love while writing it down in the wind-blown rain common to this beach town. Coming this summer from author Spiculus Narks and Warner Books, Writing in the Rain in Rodanthe. And by the way, you can stop the music now, but I think this is a great product placement opportunity for Rite in the Rain. By the way, that's spelled R-I-T-E. Sean Leacy, thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit more about your company and what it does. It really did start with the problems of people doing lumber stuff in the Pacific Northwest where there's a lot of rain.
Exactly. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Rite in the Rain the product itself started with the need for a means to be able to properly track both the amount of lumber that was being farmed here in the Pacific Northwest in the early 1900s, as well as a means to be able to coat the deeds to the lumber rights for the businesses that were doing the work up here.
So that's kind of how you get started, but really it just turns out there's a lot more people who would want to be able to write in either rainy or maybe just incredibly damp, humid, think certain parts of Florida environments. So, I mean, say a little bit more about, we should say you do notebooks, you do paper, you do writing implements, you do planners, you do various kinds of storage stuff. Who doesn't want a monsoon wallet? I don't know what that is, but I want one. So, I mean, who has your customer base turned out to be?
Yeah, originally, as I said, it was a lot of lumber industry but that's grown quite a bit over the years. We started in about 1916 here in the Pacific Northwest near Tacoma, Washington. And that market for our products, as the products have grown, has stretched into the U.S. military and both farm and agricultural notebooks, geologists, anybody who finds themselves in the outdoors. We do a lot of custom work. So, back to the agricultural work, we've got like a calving book. So people who are in the beef industry and in the cow industry, I guess you'd call it. We've got a custom notebook that's been around for a long time now. We've got notebooks for the birding industry. We've got a golf checklist and scorecard book that we sell. And we do a lot of, like I said, a lot of work with the military, though. All services or all branches of the military have been using our products for some time now. And it's been really great to see.
So we talk about the baseline product, and we can talk about some of the other stuff. Is this all-weather paper? Which, as I understand it, in principle, it was invented over 100 years ago. Just say a little bit more about that, about the length of time this has been around.
Yeah, originally it was all hand-dipped. So they would literally take the deeds and the paperwork and such, and they would dip that into a chemical that they had created that kind of had a bit more of a waxy texture to it than what our products have now. And that didn't actually, they continued doing that to the extent that even after they removed hand dipping from it, there was still such a brand for the corner being cut off where the hook was, that they continued to die cut those into our paper years down the road because that was just such a staple of what it was. Now it's all industrialized. Though we're a small warehouse here, we have a whole press shop to do most of our printing. And now it's done with a coating machine that looks more like a very wide web press where the paper goes through from big 1-ton paper rolls. It goes through a series of belts that end up applying the coating and then a curing process. And on the other end, it gets either kept at the same width or it gets cut down into smaller pieces to work with later.
I mean, there's the paper, and that really is the basis or the baseline for all of this. But do make writing implements now. I think I saw on your website a precision twist pencil, which I like the sound of that. But is it in fact possible to make writing implements that specifically aid in the basic mission of the paper? Yeah,
absolutely. I think that our pens get a lot of attention. We've worked with Fisher for a long time now, the space pens. We use their cartridges, but with a specialized ink that better works on our products. But pencils are still and always will be one of those products that you just can't get rid of. And they work the best because they can work in a lot of different environments that sometimes pens may have a difficult time with.
It's funny because we're ending the show here, but we started out with a conversation with the writer Rachel Plotnick about our very uneasy relationship between some of the electric and digital technology we use and then the liquids we just have around us all the time, beers and coffee, and we're spilling things on our keyboards and dropping phones in toilets and stuff. It's kind of interesting because this is sort of the opposite, right? This was a plan that was made over 100 years ago to have the Olympic Peninsula has it's like a rainforest. It is a rainforest.
It is a rainforest.
It is a rainforest. To have you be able to write things down in rainforest conditions. It's sort of a nice example of kind of the coexistence of human activity and water.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a market for it, and there has been for a very long time, clearly. And this product definitely does. It's withstood the test of time. We have a lot of either active duty or retired military here in the Tacoma area. And so I run into a lot of people that when they hear that I work for Rite in the Rain, they're like, oh my goodness, we used your products, in Afghanistan or in, the Southeast Asia. And I could not have done what we did without this because of the environment that they were in.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. We have to stop there. Sean Leacy is Network Assistance Administrator for Rite. That's RITE in the Rain, the products that we're talking about right now. Thanks to everybody who helped out with today's show. Thanks also to everyone who listened. And, dress appropriately.
Everything's wet. When I say everything's wet, everything's wet. When I looked in your eyes, everything's wet. When I say everything's wet, everything's wet. The phone in the pool, everything's wet. When I say everything's wet, everything's wet. When I kissed your lips, everything's wet. When I say everything's wet, everything's wet.